One of the most important jobs for an actor is to create the sense of existing within a set of imaginary circumstances. But in order to be able to do that, you need to have a way of identifying, understanding, making sense of what those circumstances are, and not just the external ones, but the psychological circumstances as well. Now, fortunately, psychologists have come up with a perfect tool for doing just that. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to use it. Hi, I'm Ben, and this is Act for Acting, where we use contemporary evidence-based psychology to help actors create deeper, more human, more credible performances. And today we're talking about given circumstances, so let's jump into that. Now, if you've trained in anything vaguely Stanislavskian, then you're probably familiar with this idea of given circumstances, and you're probably used to using some really helpful questions to help you establish what that context is. Questions like, who am I, where am I, when is it, and so on. And those questions are really, really helpful. They're vital, in fact, because they are establishing context. And without context, nothing we do as human beings, nothing that our characters do as human beings, can make any sense, right? We need to understand the context for the behaviour to be at all coherent. The difficulty comes with the fact that the context in which we exist and in which our characters exist isn't just made up of the external circumstances. We also carry around with us a set of psychological given circumstances, sets of beliefs, rules, ideas about the world and how it works that shape and inform our behaviour. And unless we have a good way of making sense of that, understanding it for ourselves in a way that we can bring into performance, then as actors, we're in danger of falling into one of two traps. The first trap you can fall into is the one of simply playing yourself. So you take on these given circumstances, some of these given circumstances, the external situation, and you respond to that, and you might do that very honestly, very truthfully, but you're responding to those circumstances essentially as yourself, right? So the character is always me in a set of circumstances. Now, some approaches to acting actively encourage that. Some people have built very successful careers on doing just that. But if for us, we think of acting as something more than that, of stepping beyond just me in a different situation into understanding the world and processing the world and being in the world in a way that captures someone else's experience of those circumstances, then we're not doing our job if the character is just me, right? So that's trap number one. Trap number two is, instead of just playing myself, because I'm aware that that's not what I want to do as an actor in the scene, I take those circumstances and I start imposing an idea of the character onto the scene. So I just start playing characteristics, I play adjectives, I respond to the circumstances, and then I put onto that, oh, I'm also excitable or innocent or somber or whatever I am, and I play those qualities, and that leads us towards something that tends to end in cliche or caricature or a broad brushstrokes approach to showing the audience who this character is. Now, many actors, of course, are aware of those traps. You know that you don't want to just play yourself. You know that you don't want to settle for doing an impression, an overall summary of this character and who they are. So you do a lot of work trying to build up this bigger psychological picture of who this person is and how they see the world. The problem comes from the fact that I think a lot of the tools that actors are taught and are given for doing this don't come together, cohere in a way that allows us to build that picture very effectively. So we get things happening like people making lots and lots of lists, right? Character lists of different characteristics, or of things I say about myself and other people say about me, and all of this stuff, which is really useful potentially. But actors make these endless lists, not sure quite what to include or what not to include, quite what to do with all of that once they've got it. And so this kind of becomes a bit of a first year acting exercise, in the sense that people do it in their first year and then many of them never do it afterwards, because they gather all this information and don't know what to do with it. Or we start to do a lot of backstory stuff, whether that's through improvisation, whether it's through kind of writing autobiographical material, whatever that might be. And again, we build up all this stuff and all this detail, and sometimes we just don't know what's useful, what's not useful. We kind of flood ourselves with detail, and it kind of gets left in the notebook, and we don't know really how to bring it into the scene. And the same thing then happens with research that gets kind of printed out and stuck on a wall or stuck in a scrapbook, and is kind of interesting, and maybe some of it goes in via osmosis and we kind of bring it to the scene, but a lot of it is kind of dutiful and is kind of there in the background, but doesn't really translate into the moment of rehearsal and the moment of performance. And so what you end up with is this kind of mass of material, mood boards and research and all of this stuff, right? But it's overwhelming and piecemeal and difficult to draw it all together. And so you can't hold it all in mind, and you end up back in the same situation of veering towards playing yourself or veering towards imposing things on the scene that are general impressions of the character. So psychologists have had exactly the same problem, right? In terms of making sense of a person's situation, they're aware of this need to hold loads of stuff in mind and to work out how various different factors are feeding into the situation and the person's current experience of it. And they call this process formulation, right? Formulating the problem, formulating the situation. And there's a very simple, straightforward model that allows us to start this process of formulation. It's called the 5 Ps model, for reasons that will become apparent very shortly. And today I'm going to show you what that model is, how to use it, and why I think it's a useful tool for actors. So the 5 Ps model gets its name because you look for information and organize that information in relation to 5 headings that start with the letter P. And those 5 headings are the presenting problem, precipitating factors, predisposing factors, perpetuating factors, and protective factors. Now, some of those words might sound a little bit tricky or a little bit off-putting, but that's mainly because psychologists worked quite hard, I think, to come up with 5 words all starting with P to maintain this idea of the 5 Ps model. So although the words sound difficult, they actually refer to some pretty simple stuff. So what we're going to do is work through what each of those headings is about and how they fit together, what sort of stuff we put into the model in response to those headings. And we're going to do that using the example of Juliet from Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. So the particular part of Juliet's story I'm going to look at is from Act 3, Scene 5, and it's when her father, Lord Capulet, comes in and tells her that she is going to marry Paris, and that he will force her to marry Paris if necessary, or cast her out and disown her. So let's see how this 5 Ps model can help us to make sense of this situation from Juliet's perspective. So we start with this thing called the presenting problem. And all that means really is, what's up? If we stopped the action right here and could ask Juliet, right, what's the problem here? What's the matter? What would she say? And that we can start with something very simple and we can expand from there. So what is the problem for Juliet in this moment, in this scene? Well, we might summarize it as her being caught between obedience and authenticity, with both choices feeling impossible, both choices feeling like they will destroy her. More simply, you know, we might say, she might say, my family is expecting me and is going to force me to go through with a wedding to a man who I don't love, whom I'd rather die than end up with. And what I want to do is to be with my husband, with Romeo, who I love, but who has been banished, who is a murderer, who I can't possibly be with. So I'm caught in this trap between impossible choices, and I don't know what to do. Next, we might ask about the precipitating factors. Now, all that means really is the immediate previous circumstances. What are the events that have triggered or led to this problem being as it is now? And for Juliet, there's a whole host of events that have happened very hot on each other's heels, which include her secret marriage to Romeo, the death of Tybalt, Romeo's banishment, and this announcement and this decision that her father has made that what's going to happen next is she's going to marry Paris. Next, we might take a step further back and ask, what are the predisposing factors? And what we mean here is, what are the things in Juliet's background that are feeding into this moment, this problem, and making it what it is? And this is where it can get really rich and expansive in terms of the discussion, and we can only hope to touch very briefly on some of the things here, but I hope I can give you an idea of the sort of thing that we're talking about. So what's in here? We have that she's lived a lifetime of patriarchal control. We have that she's will have internalized a lot of rules and expectations, particularly in terms of what it means to be a woman, what roles a woman is allowed to have, rules about obedience and silence and modesty in terms of what is expected from her. We have her sheltered childhood with little autonomy involved, that she's learnt to rely and be dependent on authority figures, her parents, the nurse. She has very little experience of being independent or taking care of herself or being allowed to make her own decisions. She's not been exposed to conflicts being resolved. She's not been involved in resolving conflicts directly, but also she lives in this world. She's been brought up in this world in which conflicts are black and white. It's you're either with us or you're against us. There are no compromises. These conflicts don't get resolved. They are permanent. And once you are an enemy, you are an enemy. And that's the way her life seems to have worked. And so this has been a very violent world outside of this, the protection of her family. So she will have a set of expectations based around that. Added to this, you've got the fact that she's only just reaching adolescence, right? She's just entering that phase of her life. So she's also experiencing things physically and emotionally that are new to her and over which she feels she's got very little control. And say there is so much more that we can start to put into this picture, but we're not just talking about everything that's about her whole history. We're looking for the specific things about her background and her upbringing and kind of who she is in that sense that is feeding directly into this problem. We can then shift over and turn our attention to these things that we call perpetuating factors, or we can call them maintaining factors, which is perhaps just an easier word for it. And what we're talking about is what is stopping this situation from being resolved. What keeps this problem going? What stops her from just ending it and moving on from this problem? And this is a really important part of the picture, because understanding what's stopping people from solving the problem is often a big part of understanding what the whole journey for this character is. So again, there's lots and lots that we could say here, and more than I've got time to try and to fit into this video now. But what is perpetuating? What keeps it going? Well, we've got the enforced secrecy around her marriage. We've got her catastrophic expectations of what it means to be cast out or to be abandoned. We've got a whole lifetime of learning to avoid direct confrontation. We've got a father who is potentially violent and certainly unpredictable. We have a nurse authority figure who is proven to be inconsistent and unreliable. We have the fact that she has a mother who is refusing to support her, all of which kind of goes into a lack of a support network that is available to her in this moment, to a lack of role models that she has, people that she can look to for an example of how you would deal with this kind of situation. And that kind of keeps her stuck, not knowing what to do. And you have within herself her unwillingness to compromise or to settle for less than what she thinks she's found with Romeo. If she was able to let go of that, that might resolve the issue, but that in itself becomes a perpetuating factor. And then we come over to what we call the protective factors. And what we mean here is, what has Juliet got going for her in this situation? What stops this situation from being perhaps even worse than it is? And again, there's a lot to say, but she's got things that she brings to this situation, like her intelligence, like her quick-wittedness and her ability to understand. We have her sense of moral clarity, the sense that she knows what she wants and what is true for her, that she has access to a remarkable amount of courage and a capacity for loving very deeply, as we see in her relationship with Romeo. So her love for Romeo is a protective factor, as well as we've mentioned, as potentially being a perpetuating factor. Her loyalty and her commitment and her belief in the love that she experiences. Now, this is an impossibly quick sketch of this situation, the very beginnings of a formulation, but you can see as we start to map things out in relation to these 5 headings, these 5 Ps, we start to create this picture of the problem from Juliet's perspective. Now, this is far from being a complete picture, but in a sense, that's the point. That's what this framework, this structure is for us to stop mapping these things out, and so we can add to them and explore further without losing where we are, because you can see from this all of these factors are feeding directly into this moment here and now. That is what we're really trying to get hold of. So what psychologists are doing when they use this is to frame their thinking, their understanding about really, really, really what is it like for this person in their situation? What's that about for them? And that's exactly what we need to do as actors. And from here, as we build this picture, we can start to bring in lots of other things, not just more detail, but different models and ideas and frameworks that we can use to interpret further and to look at how all of these different factors feed into one another. And that's when formulation starts to really take off and become something much, much richer. But I think even now, even with this really preliminary sketch, if you place yourself in that presenting problem and think about all of these things, imagine all of these things feeding into it, and think about how as an actor you could now target your exercises, your research, the things that you need to do to flesh out this picture, to make it feel real for you in the moment, then it's already doing an awful lot for us. I would argue it's already doing something to give us a much clearer sense of how we build the picture of what the circumstances really are. Formulation in this sense isn't something that actors get taught, but it's something that I think could be, perhaps should be, foundational to how we get to grips with what is going on for our characters in particular scenes, in particular circumstances. And this is very much the start of a journey in terms of psychological formulation, and there will be much more on this and on other topics in future videos. So if you found this somewhat interesting, somewhat useful, somewhat valuable, please subscribe to the channel, check out more of the videos, and come back here and I'll see you for more next time.